Hello, Recaps Lab with you, and this is Wrong Turn. The film begins with Chris Flynn rushing to an important interview, driving along the highway in his car. However, he is soon forced to stop as the highway is blocked by a traffic jam caused by an accident in which a tanker with chemicals spilled. Realizing that the consequences of the accident will take several more hours to clear up, Chris decides to go another way. Along the way, he stops at an old, half-abandoned gas station, where on the map he finds a bypass road that can be used to bypass the traffic jam and then rejoin the highway. Chris turns onto Bear Mountain Road and drives along an old dirt road. When soon, distracted from driving, he crashes into another car parked on the road. Fortunately, no one was hurt in the accident. It soon turns out that the car Chris crashed into belongs to a group of 5 tourists who, while driving, got trapped. The car's wheels were punctured when they ran over barbed wire. Now together, the friends in misfortune decide to explore the area and, if possible, find a phone to call for help. Francine and her boyfriend Evan decide to stay at the broken cars and get high, while Chris and 3 other tourists, Scott, Jesse, and Carly, go ahead to explore the area. At some point, Evan goes deep into the forest, and Francine notices this. She starts calling him and also follows him deep into the forest. After walking a short distance, Francine finds her boyfriend's shoes, and after walking even further, his ear torn off his head. Stepping back in horror, Francine moves away a few meters when suddenly a mutant of inhuman strength grabs her face from behind with barbed wire cutting along the mouth. The remaining group, led by Chris, finds an old wooden house in the depths of the forest, with various junk and rusty cars lying around. There is no answer to the knock on the door and the question, "Is anyone here?" Then the group decides to go in and inspect the house, since the door was unlocked. Inside the house there was a lot of all kinds of junk, which inspired mistrust. However, the house was not abandoned. Meat was stewing on the fire in a large saucepan. But where are the owners? During the inspection of the house, Chris goes into the kitchen, where he finds cutting, bloody tables and a refrigerator. Fearing the worst, Chris decides to look in the refrigerator and finds jars with human remains in it. The tourists realized that they stumbled upon a cannibal hunt and decide to leave the house immediately. However, at this time the owners returned home. They drove up in an old yellow pickup equipped with a winch. The back door was closed, and Chris, realizing that they would not have time to escape, gave everyone the command to hide. A mutant cannibal entered the house. It threw the body of the murdered Francine on the floor, near the bed under which Chris and Jesse were hiding. Having barely overcome their horror, they remained to wait under the bed and watch what was happening. In the same room, 2 other tourists, Scott and Carly, were hiding in the closet. Having waited until the mutant fell asleep, the tourists, led by Chris, decided to leave the house and slowly begin to get out of the places where they hid. However, right at the exit to the street, the mutant wakes up and notices the fugitives. The group rushed to run, climbing a hill near the cannibal's house. Having reached the top, they noticed how a pickup truck with 3 cannibals drove out to search for them. Continuing to run deep into the forest, the group stumbles upon a clearing where there were many cars of other victims of the cannibals. At the same time, cannibals drive up to the clearing in their pickup truck. The cannibals get out of the car and begin to inspect the clearing. Chris suggests stealing the cannibals' car, but to do this, one of the group needs to distract them. Chris decides that he will be bait and rushes in the opposite direction from the rest of the group and runs towards the forest. However, he did not manage to run far. One of the mutants shot Chris in the leg with a gun. Chris falls to the ground and screams in pain. Realizing that there is no time to waste, Scott also runs out of hiding and begins to call the mutants, giving Carly and Jesse a chance to steal the cannibal's car. 3 mutants begin to pursue him. At this time, the girls pick up the wounded Chris and run to the pickup. Opening the door, the corpse of their friend Evan fell out. Having loaded into the pickup, the trio steps on the gas and drives away from the clearing, with one of the 3 mutants chasing them. Having broken away from the mutant, Chris, Jesse, and Carly drove onto a forest road and moved forward. Soon they noticed Scott running through the forest and tried to pick him up. However, upon approaching the pickup, Scott is killed by one of the mutants with a bow shot to the back. Jesse presses the gas, and the pickup rushes forward along the forest road. After some time of driving, the pickup's road was blocked by a fallen tree, and it was impossible to reverse because the wheels were stuck in the mud. The group decided to continue on foot, moving through the forest. Chris discovers a watchtower, which they decide to climb to inspect the surroundings, and if they are lucky, find a radio station. The group is lucky. They find a first aid kit on the tower, as well as a radio station. Using the radio, Jesse requests help. A rescue team responds responds, and Jesse manages to report his location. At this time, they are discovered by mutants. They try to get to the top of the tower, but the survivors block the hatch. The mutants, for lack of another option, set the tower on fire. Chris decides to jump down, as this is the only chance to survive. Jesse and Carly follow his example, and not in vain, they all successfully land on the branches of trees, thus escaping from the tower engulfed in flames. However, the dangers did not end there. The mutants continued to pursue the survivors in the trees. One of the mutants managed to catch up with Carly and hack her to death with an axe. Chris and Jesse manage to avoid pursuit and escape. They get to the waterfall and decide to spend the night until the morning. Jesse's nightmare awakens her and Chris, and they go further, trying to get out of the cannibal forest. After a while, they came to the road, and here the mutants overtake them, throwing Chris off the slope and capturing Jesse. At this time, the sheriff is driving along the road, who was sent in connection with the request for help that was sent from the watchtower. Chris went to him, but before he could tell him anything, the sheriff was killed by a mutant with an arrow in the eye fired from a bow. Chris manages to hide from the mutant, realizing that the mutant was going to return to his house and the sheriff's car. Chris clings to the bottom of the car to try to save Jesse, who was dragged away by the mutants, having loaded the sheriff's body into the car. The mutant headed for his house. Having reached the lair of the mutants, Chris hears cries for help from Jesse, whom the cannibals were about to dismember. However, Chris disrupts their plans by setting fire to the front door, thereby distracting their attention from killing Jesse. Then Chris breaks into the cannibals' house and the sheriff's car, knocking down one mutant. Jumping out of the car, Chris sets the second mutant on fire with a Molotov cocktail and starts fighting him, piercing him with a crowbar. This gives Chris time to partially free Jesse. However, the mutant Chris pierced comes to his senses and throws him against the wall, trying to finish him off with an axe. Jesse, finally untangling himself from the wire, grabs a bow hanging on the wall and pierces the back of the head of the mutant Chris was fighting with an arrow. At this time, a third mutant bursts into the room and begins to beat Chris with a baton. Chris manages to wrap the mutant's neck with wire and hold him, while Jesse grabs an axe and finishes off the mutant, chopping off his head. However, the mutants do not die and begin to come to their senses. Chris and Jesse run out of the house, and Chris shoots a double-barreled shotgun at the canisters that were in the sheriff's car, causing an explosion. Chris and Jesse get into the mutants' pickup truck and get out of their forest, arriving at an old gas station where Chris saw a detour map. He tears it off, after which Chris and Jesse drive out onto the highway and leave alive. His colleague arrives to look for the sheriff. He discovers a burnt house of cannibals and the remains of his comrade, but a mutant appears behind him and kills him with an axe.